Take off your wedding dress. The words hit Isabella Hart like a slap. She stood frozen in the center of the luxurious penthouse suite overlooking the Chicago skyline. The white silk dress trembled against her body. Her eyes filled with disbelief. Across from her stood Alexander Hayes, one of the richest men in America. The man she loved. The man she thought loved her. His face remained unreadable. Cold. Distant. Almost cruel. You'll never have my heart. The room fell silent. Outside, thousands of city lights glittered against the darkness. Inside, Isabella felt her world shatter. Because what Alexander didn't know was that she had already given him hers. But sometimes the most painful words hide the deepest truths. And sometimes the people most afraid of love are the ones who need it most. This is the story of a woman who stopped believing in love. A man who buried his heart with his wife. And the second chance neither of them expected. 3 years earlier. At 43 years old, Isabella Hart had mastered the art of appearing happy. Every morning she woke at 6. Made coffee. Read the news. Watered the plants lining her apartment windows. Then she drove through downtown Chicago to the Luxury Hospitality Corporation where she worked as senior event coordinator. Her life looked stable. Successful. Respectable. But appearances often tell lies. The truth was that Isabella's apartment felt too quiet. The silence followed her everywhere. Especially after her daughter left for college. Some evenings she would return home from work, kick off her shoes, and realize she hadn't spoken a single personal word to anyone all day. Not one. Those moments frightened her. Not because she was lonely, but because she had grown accustomed to loneliness. And that seemed far more dangerous. Once upon a time, Isabella had believed in forever. She remembered being 25 and standing in a church wearing another white wedding dress. She remembered looking into David Hart's eyes. Remembered believing every promise. Every vow. Every dream. For years she had been a devoted wife. A supportive partner. A loving mother. While David built his career, Isabella postponed hers. While David traveled, Isabella stayed home. While David chased ambition, Isabella managed everything else. She never complained. Because love required sacrifice. At least that's what she believed. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, 15 years into their marriage, everything changed. A phone notification. A message sent to the wrong recipient. One careless mistake. That was all it took. Years of secrets exposed in seconds. David hadn't simply cheated. He had maintained another relationship for nearly 4 years. 4 years. For birthdays. For anniversaries. 4 years of lies. The betrayal destroyed something inside her. Not her ability to survive. Her ability to trust. The divorce that followed was ugly. Painful. Humiliating. By the time it ended, Isabella no longer recognized herself. The confident woman she once was had disappeared. In her place remained someone cautious. Someone guarded. Someone who promised herself she would never again give another person the power to break her heart. And for years, she kept that promise. On a chilly October evening, Isabella sat alone on her balcony. A blanket wrapped around her shoulders. A glass of wine resting beside her chair. The Chicago skyline stretched endlessly before her. Her phone rang. Emma. Her 21-year-old daughter. Isabella smiled immediately. "Hi, sweetheart." "Mom." Emma's voice carried its usual warmth. "Are you sitting alone again?" Isabella laughed. "Is that a crime now?" "No." Emma paused. "It's just, you do it a lot." "I'm relaxing." "You're hiding." The observation landed harder than Isabella expected. "Excuse me?" "You work constantly." Emma continued gently. "You never date. You never go anywhere. You never let anyone get close." Isabella stared into the darkness. "I've already had my great love story." "Mom." "It didn't exactly have a happy ending." Emma sighed. "One bad ending doesn't mean there can't be another beginning." Isabella smiled sadly. "Only young people believed love worked that way." Life taught different lessons. Especially after 40. Especially after betrayal. Especially when trust became more expensive than hope. 2,000 miles away in New York City, Alexander Hayes stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. 48 years old. Self-made billionaire. Founder of one of America's most powerful corporations. To the outside world, he had everything. Money. Influence. Respect. Success. Yet every night he returned home to an empty apartment. And every morning he woke up alone. His executive assistant entered cautiously. "Sir, your board meeting starts in 10 minutes." Alexander nodded. "Anything else?" She hesitated. "There was a message from your mother." His jaw tightened slightly. "What did she want?" "She asked if you'll attend her birthday dinner." Silence. Then a short laugh. "Tell her I'll try." The assistant left. Alexander looked toward a framed photograph sitting on his desk. A woman smiled back. Grace Hayes. His wife. The love of his life. 10 years had passed since cancer took her. 10 years. And still some mornings he reached across the bed expecting to find her there. Grief changes people. Some become softer. Alexander became harder. Work filled the emptiness. Every acquisition. Every contract. Every success. Each became another distraction. Another way to avoid confronting the loneliness waiting for him at home. People called him ruthless. The label didn't bother him. Ruthless men survived. Heartbroken men didn't. At least that was what he told himself. Until one conversation changed everything. That evening he finally attended his mother's birthday dinner. His elderly mother studied him quietly throughout the meal. Finally she spoke. "When was the last time you smiled?" Alexander nearly laughed. "I smile." "No." She shook her head. "You perform." The table fell silent. His mother continued. "Grace loved you because you were alive." Her voice softened. "But somewhere after losing her, you stopped living." Alexander looked away. Some truths hurt because they're accurate. 3 months later, Isabella received the biggest project of her career. The annual Hayes International Global Leadership Summit. Thousands of attendees. International executives. Millions of dollars. One opportunity. Her boss could barely contain his excitement. If this goes well, Isabella, you're looking at a major promotion. She smiled professionally. But inside, excitement stirred. For the first time in years, something challenged her. Inspired her. Made her feel alive. She threw herself into planning. Weeks became months. Every detail mattered. Every schedule. Every presentation. Every guest experience. She wanted perfection. Unfortunately, perfection had a name. Alexander Hayes. The first planning meeting took place inside Hayes International headquarters. Isabella entered the conference room carrying months of preparation. Alexander arrived 15 minutes late. Didn't apologize. Didn't smile. Didn't even sit down immediately. He reviewed her presentation in complete silence. The room felt suffocating. Finally he looked up. "This won't work." The word stunned everyone. Isabella blinked. "Excuse me?" The opening sequence. He pointed toward her presentation. Too long. She forced a smile. "We've tested audience engagement data." "I don't care about the data." He interrupted. "It won't work." Something inside Isabella snapped. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe frustration. Maybe years of swallowing her opinions. Whatever the reason, she refused to back down. "With respect, Mr. Hayes, if you don't care about data, why hire professionals?" The room froze. Executives exchanged horrified glances. Nobody challenged Alexander Hayes. Nobody. Alexander stared at her. His expression unreadable. For several seconds neither spoke. Then unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. Interesting. Very interesting. For the first time in years, someone had looked him in the eye without fear. And for the first time in years, Isabella found herself wondering about a man she instantly disliked. Neither realized it then. But that single argument would change both their lives forever. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with sparks. Sometimes it arrives disguised as irritation. As conflict. As two broken hearts refusing to admit they recognize themselves in each other. And neither Isabella nor Alexander were prepared for what was coming next. The meeting should have been forgettable. One difficult client. One stubborn executive. One frustrating afternoon. Yet Isabella found herself thinking about Alexander Hayes far more than she wanted to admit. Not because she liked him. Quite the opposite. The man was infuriating. Over the next several weeks, the summit planning consumed nearly every hour of her workday. And Alexander seemed determined to challenge every decision she made. The keynote schedule. The venue design. The guest accommodations. The executive dinner. Nothing escaped his scrutiny. Every conference call felt like a battle. Every meeting became a test of patience. One Tuesday morning, Isabella entered a virtual planning session already exhausted. Alexander was waiting. As usual. Perfectly dressed. Perfectly composed. Perfectly irritating. We need to change the seating arrangement. His deep voice filled the conference room. Isabella closed her eyes briefly. Alexander. She rarely called him Mr. Hayes anymore. Mostly because she knew it annoyed him. We finalized that arrangement 3 weeks ago. And now we're changing it. Do you enjoy making my life difficult? The question escaped before she could stop it. The room went silent. Several executives stared at their screens. Alexander simply looked at her. Then something unexpected happened. A hint of amusement appeared in his eyes. Not intentionally. That's comforting. It shouldn't be. For a moment, neither looked away. Something strange passed between them. Not attraction. Not yet. Recognition. Two strong people refusing to surrender ground. After the meeting ended, Isabella remained seated. Her assistant, Monica, leaned against the doorway. You know. Monica smiled. For two people who claim not to like each other, you spend an awful lot of time arguing. We don't argue. You absolutely argue. We disagree professionally. Monica laughed. Whatever helps you sleep at night. Isabella rolled her eyes. But later, driving home through Chicago traffic, she found herself replaying the conversation. And wondering why Alexander's rare smile lingered in her memory. 3 weeks later, Isabella arrived at Hayes International headquarters for an in-person planning session. The building reflected everything Alexander represented. Power. Control. Success. Employees moved with disciplined efficiency. Executives walked quickly. Everyone seemed slightly intimidated. Including people who had worked there for years. The meeting lasted most of the afternoon. By 6 o'clock, nearly everyone had left. Only Isabella remained in one of the conference rooms, reviewing updated event schedules. She rubbed her temples. A headache was forming. The door opened. She expected an assistant. Instead, Alexander entered. He carried 2 cups of coffee. She stared. Suspicious. What's that? Coffee. I can see that. His expression remained serious. Then why ask? She almost smiled. Almost. He placed 1 cup beside her. You've been here 12 hours. So have you. That's different. Because you're a billionaire? No. His eyes met hers. Because this company belongs to me. For some reason, the answer felt honest rather than arrogant. She accepted the coffee. Thank you. The word surprised both of them. For several moments, silence settled between them. Comfortable silence. Unexpected silence. Outside the windows, New York glowed beneath the evening sky. Finally, Isabella spoke. Can I ask you something? Alexander nodded. Why are you so difficult? A genuine laugh escaped him. The sound startled her. Because she realized she had never heard him laugh before. People usually ask why I'm successful. I'm not most people. No. His gaze softened slightly. You're definitely not. Something shifted. Small. Subtle. But real. For the first time, they weren't adversaries. Just two adults sharing a quiet moment. Then Alexander's phone rang. The spell broke immediately. He returned to business mode. Cold. Controlled. Distant. Yet as he left the room, Isabella noticed something unusual. Loneliness. It flashed across his face for only a second. But she saw it. And once seen, it became impossible to ignore. Over the following months, Isabella began noticing details nobody talked about. The stories employees whispered when executives weren't listening. The moments Alexander thought nobody witnessed. One afternoon, she overheard two assistants discussing a colleague whose child required emergency surgery. The insurance company had denied coverage. The family couldn't afford treatment. Days later, Isabella discovered the surgery had happened. The costs were covered. Privately. Anonymously. But everyone knew who paid. Alexander. Another time, she noticed him stop in a hallway to speak with a janitor. Not for a few seconds. For nearly 10 minutes. As though the man's opinions mattered. Because to Alexander, apparently, they did. The more she observed, the more confused she became. The ruthless CEO the media described didn't match the man she was seeing. One evening, while delivering revised documents to his office, she found the door partially open. Alexander sat alone. A photograph rested in his hands. He stared at it with an expression she'd never seen before. Pain. Raw. Unprotected. Human. Before she could retreat quietly, the floor creaked. Alexander looked up immediately. Their eyes met. The vulnerability vanished. His walls returned instantly. I'm sorry. She stepped back. I didn't mean to interrupt. It's fine. But his voice sounded different. Quieter. She hesitated. Then took a risk. Was she your wife? The question lingered between them. For a moment, she thought he might tell her to leave. Instead, he nodded. Her name was Grace. The way he spoke her name revealed everything. Love. Loss. Longing. 10 years hadn't diminished any of it. I'm sorry. Alexander looked at the photograph. So am I. It was the most honest thing she'd ever heard him say. Weeks later, the summit preparations reached a critical stage. Pressure mounted. Deadlines approached. Everyone felt exhausted. Especially Isabella. One evening, she sat alone reviewing final logistics when her phone rang. Emma. Immediately, she answered. Hi, sweetheart. No response. Instead, an unfamiliar voice spoke. Are you Emma Hart's mother? Every parent's heart knows that moment. That instant when fear arrives before understanding. Yes. Your daughter has been involved in a motor vehicle accident. The world stopped. Everything else disappeared. The next several hours became a blur. Flights. Phone calls. Hospitals. Terror. By the time Isabella arrived, she was barely holding herself together. Emma was alive, but injured. Doctors needed additional scans, specialists, evaluations. Every minute felt unbearable. Isabella sat alone in a hospital waiting room long after midnight. Completely exhausted. Completely terrified. Then she heard footsteps. She looked up. And froze. Alexander stood there. For a moment, she couldn't understand what she was seeing. "How did you?" Monica called. He sat beside her. Nothing more. No speeches. No dramatic declarations. Just presence. Support. Understanding. Over the next several hours, Alexander quietly handled problems she couldn't manage. Specialists were contacted. Administrative delays disappeared. Necessary arrangements happened almost instantly. Yet what mattered most wasn't his influence. It was the fact that he stayed. Hour after hour. Without being asked. Without seeking credit. Without making it about himself. Around 3 in the morning, Isabella finally broke. The fear. The stress. The exhaustion. The months of emotional pressure. It all became too much. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She tried hiding them. Alexander gently handed her a tissue. Nothing else. No awkward comfort. No empty reassurances. Just quiet understanding. And somehow that meant more. For a long time, they sat together in silence. Two wounded people. Two lonely souls. Two hearts carrying scars invisible to everyone else. Finally Isabella whispered, "I don't know what I'd do if I lost her." Alexander stared ahead. His voice came quietly. "I do." The word struck her immediately. Not because of what he said. Because of what it revealed. For the first time, she understood something profound. Alexander wasn't afraid of love. He was afraid of surviving another loss. And suddenly his walls made perfect sense. Emma recovered steadily. The crisis passed. Life returned to normal. Or at least it should have. Instead, something had changed. The emotional distance between Isabella and Alexander no longer felt natural. Their conversations became easier. Longer. More personal. One evening after a planning session, they found themselves walking through downtown Manhattan. Neither seemed eager to leave. The city sparkled around them. Cold autumn air filled the streets. "You know." Alexander glanced toward her. "I expected you to quit." She laughed. "You underestimate my stubbornness." "No." His eyes held hers. "I underestimated your strength." The compliment hit harder than it should have. Because it wasn't about appearance. Or charm. Or attraction. It was about who she was. And after years of feeling invisible, that mattered. A lot. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Isabella asked quietly, "Do you ever think about loving someone again?" Alexander stopped walking. The question clearly caught him off guard. After a long silence, he answered. "Every day. Hope flickered unexpectedly inside her. Then he continued. And every day I convince myself not to. Her heart tightened. Because she understood exactly what he meant. Some wounds don't stop us from loving. They convince us love isn't worth the risk. Neither realized it then. But somewhere between the hospital waiting room and that quiet conversation beneath the city lights, friendship had become something deeper. Something more dangerous. Something neither of them was ready to name. And unfortunately, the greatest challenge to their growing connection was about to arrive. A challenge powerful enough to destroy everything they had begun to build. There comes a moment in every relationship when two people stop learning facts about each other and begin understanding each other. For Isabella and Alexander, that moment arrived quietly. Without warning. Without announcement. Without either of them realizing how much had changed. The Global Leadership Summit was now only 6 weeks away. Preparation meetings became more frequent. Travel schedules became more demanding. Their professional lives became increasingly intertwined. But somewhere along the way, their conversations stopped being entirely about work. They began sharing pieces of themselves. The parts they rarely showed anyone else. One evening after a 12-hour planning session, they found themselves alone in a rooftop restaurant overlooking Manhattan. Neither seemed eager to end the evening. A soft breeze moved across the terrace. The city lights sparkled below. For the first time, there were no assistants. No executives. No deadlines. Just two people sharing dinner. Alexander studied her across the table. You always carry everyone else's burdens. Isabella looked up. What does that mean? It means you're exhausted. She laughed softly. That's not exactly an insightful observation. No. His voice lowered. It means you've spent so many years taking care of other people that you've forgotten how to let someone take care of you. The word struck a nerve. Because they were true. Painfully true. For years she had been a wife. Then a mother. Then a provider. Then a problem solver. Everyone needed something from her. Very few people ever asked what she needed. She looked away. I don't know how. Alexander's expression softened. Neither do I. The admission surprised her. A man like Alexander Hayes wasn't supposed to admit weakness. Yet lately, she was seeing more and more of the man beneath the armor. And she found herself liking him far more than she should. The first sign that their feelings had evolved beyond friendship came unexpectedly. And neither handled it well. During a corporate reception in Boston, Isabella spent nearly 20 minutes speaking with a successful architect who had been hired for one of the summit's venue projects. The man was charming. Confident. Single. And clearly interested. Alexander noticed immediately. He tried ignoring it. Tried focusing on conversations around him. Tried convincing himself it wasn't his business. None of it worked. Throughout the evening, he caught himself watching them. Watching her laugh. Watching her smile. Watching another man enjoy her attention. The realization irritated him. Because jealousy wasn't an emotion he welcomed. Especially after 10 years of emotional isolation. Later that evening, Isabella approached him. "You seem distracted." "I'm not." "You are." He sighed. "Perhaps the architect should be handling your event planning." Her eyebrows lifted. "Excuse me?" "You seemed very engaged." Understanding flashed across her face. Then amusement. Dangerous amusement. "Are you jealous?" Alexander nearly choked on his drink. "No." "Alexander." "No." "Alexander." He looked away. She laughed. A genuine laugh. And for the first time in years, Alexander realized something terrifying. He cared. Far more than he intended. Far more than he should. And that frightened him. Because caring always created the possibility of loss. The weeks passed quickly. And their connection deepened. Small moments accumulated. Conversations after midnight. Unexpected text messages. Shared jokes. Comfortable silences. The kind of intimacy that grows slowly. Naturally. Dangerously. One rainy evening in Chicago, Isabella found herself stranded after a flight cancellation. Without thinking, she called Alexander. He answered immediately. By midnight they were sitting in a quiet hotel lounge. Talking. Not about business. About life. About regret. About aging. About dreams abandoned along the way. At one point, Isabella asked a question she had wondered about for months. "Do you ever feel guilty?" Alexander frowned. "About what?" "Being happy." The question hung between them. His expression changed immediately. She knew she had touched something important. After a long silence, he answered. "Every day." Her heart tightened. "Because of grace?" He nodded. "When someone you love dies." His voice grew quieter. "Part of you believes moving forward means leaving them behind." The vulnerability in his words made her chest ache. She reached across the table. Placed her hand over his. For several seconds neither moved. Neither spoke. The contact felt simple. Yet profound. Alexander looked down at their joined hands. Then back at her. Something passed between them. A feeling neither could deny anymore. A feeling both desperately wanted. And desperately feared. Unfortunately, relationships rarely develop in isolation. People notice. People talk. People judge. Especially when one person is one of America's most powerful CEOs. Rumors spread quickly throughout Hayes International. Executives whispered. Board members speculated. Shareholders became concerned. During one particularly tense board meeting, a senior director addressed Alexander directly. "There's growing concern regarding your relationship with Ms. Hart." The room became silent. Alexander's eyes hardened. "What relationship?" The director hesitated. "The one everyone believes exists." The implication angered him. Not because it was entirely wrong. Because other people thought they had a right to discuss it. After the meeting ended, his longtime friend and chief financial officer, Richard Bennett, approached him. "You love her." Alexander immediately denied it. Richard laughed. Alexander. Silence. You're the worst liar I've ever met. The words lingered long after Richard walked away. Because deep down, Alexander knew the truth. He was falling in love. The realization should have made him happy. Instead, it terrified him. While Alexander faced corporate pressure, Isabella faced something equally difficult. Self-doubt. One evening she met Monica and several friends for dinner. Eventually the conversation turned toward Alexander. As it always seemed to lately. One friend leaned forward. "Can I ask something?" Isabella nodded. "What exactly does he want from you?" The question irritated her. "What does that mean?" "It means he's a billionaire." Her friend shrugged. "You're a wonderful woman, Isabella. But men like him don't usually build serious relationships with women like us." The words hurt. Not because they were cruel. Because they reflected fears she already carried. Later that night, Isabella lay awake replaying the conversation. The doubts multiplied. Why would a man like Alexander choose her? She wasn't 25. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't part of his world. She was a divorced woman in her 40s. A mother. A professional. Someone carrying her own emotional scars. The insecurities she thought she'd overcome suddenly returned. And once doubt enters the heart, it becomes difficult to silence. 3 weeks before the summit, everything changed. Again. The final preparations required a small executive retreat in Aspen. A luxury mountain resort. Private. Exclusive. Beautiful. The setting created opportunities neither anticipated. One evening after a successful planning session, Isabella stepped outside onto a balcony overlooking snow-covered mountains. The night air felt crisp. Peaceful. She didn't hear Alexander approach. Only sensed his presence beside her. For several moments they stood together in silence, watching the snowfall. Finally Alexander spoke. "You look happy." She smiled. "I am." His gaze remained on her. "You should be." The way he said it made her heart race. Slowly she turned toward him. Their eyes met. Everything else disappeared. The snow. The mountains. The world. Neither looked away. Neither moved. Yet the space between them suddenly felt charged. Alive. Dangerous. For months they had danced around the truth. Avoided it. Denied it. But now it stood between them. Impossible to ignore. Alexander lifted his hand. Gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture felt intimate. Tender. Unexpected. Isabella's breath caught. His eyes dropped briefly to her lips. Then returned to her eyes. The moment stretched. Neither wanted it to end. Then a voice called from inside. The spell shattered. Reality returned. Alexander stepped back immediately. The distance between them returned. Professional. Safe. Necessary. Yet neither slept much that night. Because both finally understood what was happening. They were no longer simply friends. No longer colleagues. No longer two lonely people finding comfort in each other's company. They were falling in love. And love was precisely what both had sworn never to risk again. The summit finally arrived. Months of preparation culminated in a spectacular event. Everything went perfectly. The presentations, the guest experiences, the executive meetings, the media coverage. It was the greatest professional success of Isabella's career. Everyone celebrated. Everyone praised her work. Everyone congratulated Alexander. To the outside world, it seemed like a perfect ending. But life rarely announces its storms before they arrive. 3 days after the summit concluded, Isabella remained behind to organize final documentation. Corporate archives, financial records, historical acquisitions, routine paperwork. Nothing unusual. Until she discovered a file. One acquisition. One company purchase. One decision made years earlier. At first the name meant nothing. Then recognition struck. The blood drained from her face. Her hands began trembling. Because the company Alexander had acquired 15 years earlier was the same company that had employed her father. The same acquisition that led to massive layoffs. The same financial collapse that devastated her family. The same chain of events that contributed to her father's decline before his death. Suddenly everything looked different. Every memory. Every feeling. Every moment she had shared with Alexander. And the worst part? The file revealed something even more shocking. Alexander had known about the connection. 4 months. Maybe longer. Yet he never told her. The betrayal hit harder than she expected. Harder because she loved him. Harder because she trusted him. Harder because she believed he was different. As tears filled her eyes, one realization became impossible to ignore. The greatest obstacle to their future wasn't social status, or public opinion, or fear. It was the truth. And the truth was about to destroy everything they had built. Everything. The file slipped from Isabella's hands. Papers scattered across the floor. Yet she barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to a single realization. Alexander knew. 4 months. Perhaps longer. He knew his corporation's acquisition had devastated her family. He knew the factory closure had cost her father his livelihood. He knew the financial hardship that followed had changed the course of her life. And he said nothing. The silence hurt more than the acquisition itself. Because silence felt like deception. The office suddenly seemed too small. Too suffocating. Too full of memories she no longer knew how to trust. Every conversation replayed inside her mind. Every vulnerable moment. Every late-night confession. Every gentle glance. Had all of it been real? Or had Alexander simply decided she wasn't strong enough to know the truth? The answer mattered. Because trust was not a small thing to Isabella Hart. Trust was everything. And trust, once broken, rarely returned unchanged. Without allowing herself time to think, she picked up her phone. "Tell Mr. Hayes I need to see him. Immediately." Alexander arrived less than 15 minutes later. The moment he entered the conference room, he knew something was wrong. Very wrong. Isabella stood beside the windows. Her face pale. Her eyes filled with disappointment. Not anger. Disappointment. And somehow that frightened him more. What happened? She held up the file. No words. No explanation. Just the file. The color drained from his face immediately. Because he recognized it. And he knew exactly what was coming. For several seconds neither spoke. Neither moved. Finally Isabella broke the silence. How long? Alexander closed his eyes briefly. Isabella. How long? Her voice cracked. This time he answered. 6 months. The words landed like a hammer. 6 months. 6 months of conversations. 6 months of friendship. 6 months of growing feelings. 6 months of silence. She stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. You knew. Not at first. I didn't ask when you learned it. Tears filled her eyes. I asked if you knew. Alexander nodded. The gesture shattered something inside her. You should have told me. I know. Then why didn't you? The question hung heavily between them. Alexander struggled to find the words. Because the truth sounded pathetic. Weak. Human. I was afraid. She laughed bitterly. The sound broke his heart. Afraid? Afraid you'd leave. Silence. Painful silence. Then Isabella shook her head. You don't get to decide what truths I can handle. No. His voice softened. I don't. You took that choice from me. The accusation was fair. And they both knew it. For the first time in years, Alexander Hayes had no defense. No strategy. No solution. Only regret. Unfortunately, regret changes nothing. Not when trust has already been damaged. Not when old wounds have been reopened. Not when the person standing before you feels betrayed. Finally Isabella stepped back. A small movement. Yet it felt like a canyon opening between them. I need space. The words nearly crushed him. But he nodded. Because he understood. And because he loved her enough not to stop her. Even if letting her leave destroyed him. Several days later, Alexander made one final attempt. One final effort to explain. To apologize. To fix what seemed impossible to repair. He traveled to Chicago. Waited outside her apartment. Eventually Isabella agreed to meet. Not because she wanted to. Because she needed closure. The conversation took place in a quiet private dining room overlooking Lake Michigan. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The atmosphere felt heavy. Exhausted. Sad. Alexander spoke first. I never wanted to hurt you. You did. I know. The honesty surprised her. But not enough. Nothing could undo what happened. Nothing could erase the months of secrecy. As the conversation continued, frustration grew. Pain surfaced. Old wounds reopened. Eventually emotions overwhelmed reason. And Alexander made the mistake that would haunt him for months. He tried protecting himself, the way wounded people often do. With distance. With cruelty. With words designed to hurt before they could be hurt. When Isabella asked whether he truly saw a future together, fear answered before his heart could. He stood abruptly. Turned away. Then spoke the words that would echo through both their lives. The words struck with devastating force. Alexander regretted them instantly. The moment they left his mouth. But it was too late. Far too late. Because Isabella's face changed. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Something worse. The hope disappeared. And once hope leaves someone's eyes, it is difficult to forget. Without another word, she walked away. This time she didn't look back. The separation lasted 5 months. 5 painful months. 5 lonely months. 5 months of pretending. Isabella returned to her life. Or at least attempted to. She accepted new projects. Attended social events. Focused on work. Smiled when necessary. Yet every achievement felt incomplete. Every success felt quieter. Every evening felt longer. Because no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Meanwhile, Alexander buried himself in business. Again. Just as he had after losing Grace. Long hours. Endless meetings. International travel. Corporate acquisitions. The familiar distractions returned. But this time they didn't work. Because he now understood the difference between grief and loneliness. Grief honored someone you lost. Loneliness came from pushing away someone still alive. And that realization became unbearable. One evening Richard Bennett finally confronted him. "You look miserable." "I'm fine." "You stepped down from 3 boards." Silence. "You cancelled half your public appearances." More silence. "You've become impossible to work with." Alexander sighed heavily. Richard leaned forward. "Go get her." The simplicity of the advice irritated him. "What if she doesn't want me?" Richard smiled sadly. "Then at least you'll know." At nearly the same time, Isabella received her own confrontation. From Emma. Her daughter had returned home for the weekend. And like most daughters who know their mothers well, she saw through every lie. The two sat together on the balcony overlooking Chicago. The same balcony where Isabella had spent countless evenings convincing herself she was happy. Emma studied her quietly. "Do you love him?" Isabella looked away. No answer. Emma smiled gently. "That's not a no." Tears filled Isabella's eyes. "I don't know how to trust him." "Maybe." Emma nodded. "But that's not what you're really afraid of." The observation caught her attention. "What do you mean?" Emma reached for her hand. "You're afraid he'll hurt you." The words landed softly. Yet powerfully. Because they were true. Not because of the acquisition. Not because of the secret. Not even because of the cruel words. She was afraid because she loved him. And love always creates risk. Emma squeezed her hand. You spent years letting Dad convince you that you weren't enough. Her voice trembled. Don't let fear convince you that happiness isn't worth the risk. The words stayed with Isabella long after the conversation ended. Because deep down, she knew her daughter was right. Several states away, Alexander sat across from the one person who had never been intimidated by him. His mother. She listened quietly as he described everything. The mistakes. The lies. The fear. The loss. When he finally finished, she smiled sadly. You know what's interesting? What? You survived losing Grace. Alexander looked down. His mother continued. But somewhere afterward. Her voice softened. You stopped living. The word struck deeply. Because he had spent 10 years honoring grief. Without realizing he was also worshipping it. Using it. Hiding behind it. Avoiding vulnerability. Avoiding possibility. Avoiding love. His mother reached across the table. You don't dishonor the people you've lost by loving again. Tears filled Alexander's eyes. The realization hit him all at once. Love wasn't replacing Grace. Love wasn't forgetting her. Love wasn't betrayal. Love was courage. And for the first time in years, he was ready to be brave. The announcement stunned everyone. Including the media. Including shareholders. Including his own executives. Alexander Hayes announced a temporary leave from his role as CEO. Financial news channels exploded with speculation. Industry experts searched for explanations. The truth was simple. For years he had built an empire. Now he wanted a life. Success meant nothing if every victory was celebrated alone. Every achievement echoed through an empty home. Every milestone lacked someone to share it with. For the first time in decades, Alexander chose something other than business. He chose love. Or at least the possibility of it. And he intended to fight for it. No matter the outcome. No matter the risk. No matter how terrified he felt. Because some people become worth the fear. And Isabella Hart had become one of them. 3 weeks later, a charity gala filled one of Chicago's most elegant ballrooms. The event supported educational scholarships. Isabella had organized it. As usual, everything ran flawlessly. Guests filled the room. Music floated softly through the air. Champagne glasses sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Then the unexpected happened. Alexander Hayes walked in. The room immediately noticed. Whispers spread. Conversation stopped. Even Isabella froze. For a moment she couldn't breathe. He looked different. Not physically. Emotionally. Lighter. More open. More human. Their eyes met across the ballroom. The world seemed to disappear. Slowly Alexander walked toward the stage. Accepted the microphone. Then did something nobody expected. He told the truth. Not about business. About himself. His fears. His mistakes. His grief. His loneliness. His love. Every word was sincere. Every admission vulnerable. Every sentence stripped away another layer of armor. Finally his gaze found Isabella. In front of everyone. Without hesitation. Without excuses. Without pride. He said the words she never expected to hear. I love you. The room fell silent. And for the first time in years, Alexander Hayes had nothing left to hide. For several seconds after Alexander's public confession, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The ballroom remained suspended in a moment that felt larger than time itself. Isabella stood motionless. Her heart hammered against her chest. Around her, hundreds of people waited. Watching. Listening. Holding their breath. But she barely noticed any of them. All she saw was Alexander. The man who had broken her heart. The man who had helped heal it. The man standing before an entire room without his usual armor. Without power. Without control. Without certainty. For perhaps the first time in his life, Alexander Hayes looked vulnerable. And somehow that affected her more than anything he had said. Because she knew how difficult this was for him. She knew what it cost him. Alexander slowly stepped down from the stage. The microphone forgotten. The audience forgotten. The world forgotten. Only Isabella mattered. When he finally reached her, neither spoke immediately. Their eyes carried months of pain. Months of longing. Months of unanswered questions. Finally Alexander broke the silence. You don't owe me forgiveness. His voice was quiet. Raw. You don't owe me another chance. Isabella swallowed hard. He continued. But I needed you to know the truth. A tear slipped down her cheek. Alexander's expression softened. The truth is that loving you became the most important thing in my life. The word struck directly at the walls she had spent years building. Walls created by betrayal. By disappointment. By fear. And suddenly those walls felt very tired. Very old. Very unnecessary. For the first time since their separation, Isabella stepped closer. Not much. Just enough. But Alexander noticed. And hope appeared in his eyes. A dangerous hope. The kind that changes lives. Love stories often end with dramatic declarations. Real life rarely works that way. Trust doesn't return overnight. Pain doesn't disappear because someone apologizes. Healing requires time. Patience. Effort. And both Isabella and Alexander understood that. Over the following weeks, they began again. Slowly. Carefully. Honestly. This time there were no secrets. No assumptions. No emotional games. Only truth. Sometimes the conversations were difficult. They discussed the acquisition. The silence. The hurt. The fear. Every uncomfortable topic that previously remained hidden. And with every conversation, something remarkable happened. Trust began returning. Not because they ignored the past. Because they confronted it. Together. One evening, while walking beside Lake Michigan, Alexander asked a question. Do you know what scared me most? Isabella looked at him. Losing me? A faint smile touched his lips. No. She raised an eyebrow. No? He stopped walking. His gaze held hers. What scared me most was realizing how much power you had to hurt me. The honesty caught her off guard. Alexander continued. I hadn't cared about anyone that deeply in 10 years. His voice softened. And that terrified me. For a long moment, Isabella simply stared at him. Then she reached for his hand. Not because everything was perfect. Not because all the pain had vanished. But because she finally understood something important. Fear wasn't the opposite of love. Sometimes fear existed because love mattered. And courage wasn't the absence of fear. Courage was choosing love anyway. 3 months later, Alexander invited Isabella to dinner. The invitation seemed ordinary. Until she arrived. The restaurant had been reserved exclusively for them. Soft music played in the background. Candles flickered gently. The atmosphere felt intimate. Meaningful. Different. Immediately Isabella sensed something unusual. Alexander appeared nervous. Actually nervous. A sight she never thought she would witness. As dessert arrived, he stood. Without explanation. Without warning. Then disappeared briefly into another room. When he returned, he carried a large garment bag. Confusion crossed Isabella's face. What is that? Alexander placed it carefully beside her. For several seconds he simply stared at it. As though gathering courage. Then he handed it to her. Slowly Isabella unzipped the bag. Her breath caught instantly. Inside was a wedding dress. Elegant. Timeless. Beautiful. For a moment she couldn't speak. Couldn't think. Couldn't understand. Memories rushed back immediately. Painful memories. Confusing memories. The words he once spoke. The words that shattered her. The words she never forgot. Alexander noticed the emotion in her eyes. And finally he said them again. The exact same words. Take off your wedding dress. The air left her lungs. The room fell silent. Time seemed to stop. Every memory returned. Every wound. Every heartbreak. Every tear. For one terrifying second she wondered if she had misunderstood everything. Then Alexander stepped closer. His eyes shining with emotion. And finished the sentence. You'll never have my heart. A tear slipped down Isabella's cheek. Alexander smiled gently. Then whispered the words that changed everything. Because you already have it. Silence. Pure silence. Followed by overwhelming emotion. The meaning transformed instantly. The painful words that once represented rejection now became a confession. A promise. A declaration. A surrender. Alexander Hayes, the man who protected his heart more fiercely than his fortune, was finally giving it away. Completely. Freely. Willingly. To her. Alexander slowly lowered himself onto one knee. The entire restaurant seemed to disappear. Only the two of them remained. His voice trembled slightly. A rare occurrence. Isabella Hart. He paused, emotion thickening his words. For years, I believed losing someone meant I could never love again. Tears filled her eyes. Alexander continued. Then you walked into a conference room and argued with me. A soft laugh escaped her. He smiled. You challenged me. You frustrated me. You changed me. His gaze never left hers. You reminded me that surviving isn't the same as living. The tears flowed freely now. Alexander reached into his pocket. Removed a small velvet box. Opened it. Inside rested a breathtaking diamond ring. But the ring barely mattered. Because his next words mattered infinitely more. I don't need perfection. His voice shook. I don't need certainty. I don't need guarantees. I only need the chance to spend the rest of my life loving you. The room blurred through Isabella's tears. Every heartbreak. Every disappointment. Every lonely night. Every moment she believed her love story was over. All of it led here. To this moment. To this man. To this choice. Will you marry me? For a second she couldn't answer. Emotion overwhelmed language. Then finally she nodded. Once. Twice. Again. Yes. A whisper. Then louder. Yes. Then through tears and laughter. Yes, Alexander. The restaurant erupted into applause. But neither heard it. Because they were already wrapped in each other's arms. Holding on. As though neither intended to let go again. 6 months later. Chicago. Early spring. The city glowed beneath clear blue skies. Friends and family gathered. Emma stood proudly beside her mother. Alexander's mother smiled through happy tears. Even Richard Bennett appeared emotional. Though he denied it repeatedly. And at the center of it all stood Isabella. Wearing a wedding dress. Not because she needed someone to complete her. Not because she feared being alone. Not because she required rescue. But because she chose love. The strongest love stories are never about dependency. They're about partnership. Two complete people choosing each other. Every day. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Simple. Meaningful. Real. When Isabella finally walked down the aisle, Alexander looked at her the way every woman deserves to be seen. With admiration. With gratitude. With love. The vows reflected everything they had survived. Everything they had learned. Everything they had become. And when they finally exchanged rings, there wasn't a single dry eye in attendance. Because everyone present understood something profound. This wasn't young love. This wasn't fantasy. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was something rarer. A second chance. And second chances are often more beautiful because people understand their value. 2 years later. Life looked different. Not perfect. Real. Beautifully real. Isabella continued building her career. Alexander remained involved in his company while maintaining a healthier balance. Emma graduated college. Alexander's mother frequently joined family dinners. Laughter filled spaces once occupied by silence. Love filled spaces once occupied by fear. Most importantly, neither person lost themselves in the relationship. Instead, they became stronger versions of themselves. Together. One evening Isabella stood on the balcony of their Chicago penthouse, watching the sunset. Alexander joined her, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. For several moments neither spoke. The city sparkled beneath them. Finally Isabella smiled. "You know." "What?" She leaned against him. "I almost walked away forever." Alexander kissed her forehead gently. "So did I." Silence. Then she looked up. "No regrets?" His answer came immediately. "Only one." She laughed softly. "What's that?" Alexander smiled. "That I didn't fight for you sooner." And as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Isabella realized something she wished she had understood years earlier. Love doesn't always arrive when we're young. Sometimes it arrives after heartbreak. After loss. After disappointment. After we've stopped expecting it. And perhaps that's what makes it so powerful. Because mature love isn't built on fantasy. It's built on choice. Trust. Forgiveness. Courage. And the willingness to risk your heart one more time. Stories like this remind us that love doesn't end with heartbreak. Sometimes it begins there. Sometimes the greatest love of your life arrives after you've already convinced yourself your story is over. Sometimes healing starts when someone sees the broken parts of you and stays anyway. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is open their heart again. Not because it's safe, but because it's worth it. If Isabella and Alexander taught us anything, it's this. The past may shape you, but it does not have to define your future. Love after 40 is possible. Love after betrayal is possible. Love after grief is possible. And second chances can become the most beautiful chapters of all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful mature romance stories filled with hope, healing, and unforgettable love. And tell me in the comments. What would you do if love found you again when you least expected it? Thank you for watching. And don't miss the next story waiting for you. Because sometimes the next chapter changes everything.